The Thursday, February 24th meeting of the Board of Directors of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority. Quorum is present. We'll get started. Can I have somebody move to approve the agenda this evening?
So moved.
Moved by Rich, seconded by Jesse. Show of hands. All in favor? Any opposed? Just in time? There you go. We'll move then to public comment 1.2. Anybody from the public who wants to address us this evening, either in person or remotely. If you are remote, please click the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. If you want to join by video, if you are on the phone, press *9. We'll start with the people, and you'll have up to 3 minutes to address the board on any topic that you want to talk about. So we'll start with person, please.
Thank you, Chairman Mahler. Good afternoon, everyone. Robert Pulowski here from Southgate and Wayne County. Glad to see everybody in person for long 2 years of virtual meetings. First thing I'd like to start off with today, and I'm going to reiterate what I said to the Public Transit Committee. I know Matt was there for the meeting. 2022 is the year of opportunity. As you all know, we've got back to going to restoring service and getting back to our full service to get our riders to and from where they need to go. I'd like to see more projects come into the works, start easing in connections between our partners agency SMART, and also work out, maybe even to pair up to get Canton on the ballot for transit. I know we ripped away from having our express route in Canton, which was not a lot of ridership, but to have another connection and to talk with the city to bring transit back, but bring fixed routes to the system. That will bring more jobs and more riders to the system. Also giving more connections for people in Western Wayne County to reach Ann Arbor. I know D2A2 is the only system right now, especially Michigan Flyer, but you know, $8 and $12, I mean, some people can't afford it. You know, people need to have reliable transportation to and from Wayne and Washtenaw County. I know myself, it was tough getting out here, getting D2A2, and it's going to be tough getting back. But, you know, this is just the starting point. You know, seeing the bigger and better picture of having reliable transportation in our region. If we can get a connection between our partner agency SMART, that's the start to having the RTA come into our region. And I'll be campaigning on that as far as I can, all the way to 2024. Especially, I'd like to see some supporters from AAATA as well. Keep up the good work, and let's see some good projects going forward into this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for board members, I know this is our first time in person in a while, but as you can hear, there's a little echoey feedback kind of going. So let's make sure when somebody else is talking, our mics are off because it's going to create huge feedback. Deb, do we have anybody on virtually who wants to speak to the board this evening?
We do. Mr. Mogensen, hold on a second. And he should be unmuted to speak.
Mr. Mogensen, go ahead.
You should be unmuted. Oh, there you are.
Yep. Hello. Yes, it took a little bit. I had to rejoin as a panelist, so it was a little complicated, but here we are. Good to see you all. So there are a couple of things that are happening in the community that I think it's important for you to know about. The first is confusion about the millages. I know that there are the potential of the renewal millage and the conversation about the long range plan and those millages. And those are all being subsumed into one conversation. And that's important because the most, the one scenario where people were most interested in had a very dramatic potential increase in the millage. And that is being combined with all kinds of other conversations in ways that are difficult to piece apart. So I just wanted to let you know that that is happening. The other thing that is this emerging concern relates to the propulsion study. So I know the propulsion study is being done And the reason that matters in all the mix of everything else is depending on what the propulsion study decides and how that works out, people are going to have strong feelings either way. And if the decision is to dramatically change propulsion to electric buses, for example, that will have budgetary capital implications that will also impact everything else. And the final thing I'd like to say is to give you a heads up that the Federal Transit Authority is looking to revise its Title VI circular. So you need to keep track of that as that situation emerges. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else remotely who's going to want to address the board this evening? Deb, anybody else? No one else. Thank you. We'll close the public comment then and go on to section 1.3, general announcements. Any general announcements from the staff or the board this evening? Mr. Carpenter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, this packet that we're using this evening is the exact same packet as we would have used last night, if not for, or last week, excuse me, if not for the snowstorm. We did change the date on the front page for the online version. So if anyone's looking at the online packet, you will see today's date on the front page, but we didn't change the dates on all of the other material to try to save paper, save the resolutions that are here where we have updated that. So I just wanted to make that note.
Thank you. Any other general announcements from the board members? Not seeing any, we'll move on to section 2, the consent agenda. We have board meeting minutes from December, our committee meeting summaries. There's Transportation Commission delegates about representing us to the city, and a FY23 state application resolution, which is in the course of usual business. Can I have somebody move the consent agenda? Mr. Hewitt, seconded by Mr. Hunter. All those in favor of the consent agenda, raise your hand. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to section 3 then, the strategy operational updates from the CEO. Section 3.1, it looks like Mr. Forrest Yang will lead us through that unless Mr. Carpenter wants to tee it off with some context. So we'll turn over to Mr. Yang. Go ahead, Forrest.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. First, I just want to make sure our guests are here. So I would like to ask Deb to promote them as panelists. Okay, so I don't know if you can see on the screen yet. So Jennifer Hall from the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, Executive Director, join us today. And then Jeff Cahan from a city planner from the city of Ann Arbor in the planning department. And then we have Michael Johnson from the Smith Group as the consultants working on this project. I haven't seen them on screen, but let me continue while we're waiting for them to join us for the presentation later on. Anyway, so before we start the presentation, I would like to ask your attention on the issue summary, page 27 of the agenda packet. So basically the purpose for tonight's presentation is to provide you an update on the latest plan for 350 South Fifth, known as Y-Lot, and I ask for your support before it goes to Ann Arbor City Council. As you know, in the last few years, staff have been working with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, the City of Ann Arbor, and the Downtown Development Authority to develop this plan. Of course, try to meet the city's needs for affordable housing, and also to provide some additional capacity at the Blake Transit Center for transit riders. So this plan you're going to see shortly is a joint recommendation by all partners. It was endorsed by the Ann Arbor Planning Commission in January. So it's kind of a desirable for the RIDE to endorse it before it goes to City Council in March. So because the planning process we're going through with this project, detailed design and final budget figures are not going to be confirmed until late 2023. While this is not a budget for approval or a financial commitment, it is an institutional commitment that will be hard to pull out later. Nevertheless, going through this collaborative planning process, staff believes the proposed plan is a reasonable balancing of different needs, interests, and this will ensure a positive and a pro-transit development on this site. So staff strongly recommend the board support the direction. So I see Jennifer join us. So let me share my screen. Hopefully I can bring up the PowerPoint. So just want to confirm, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. All right. So for tonight's presentation, this is a quick outline. So I'm going to ask Jennifer to give us a quick overview of Ann Arbor housing project, the affordable housing project in Ann Arbor. And then we'll go through some details about the concept plan and some costs and timeline. So Jennifer, I can see you. I don't know. I will turn that over to you.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the public partnership between the RIDE, the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, the City of Ann Arbor, and the DDA. It makes for a longer, slower process, but I think a much better process when we're all trying to align our goals. I'm obviously here from the affordable housing side of that public process. And right now there's really strong both community support for affordable housing as well as our elected officials. And so we do have a lot of momentum toward trying to meet our goals of adding over 2,800 units of affordable housing between 2015 and 2035. We recently had a millage that passed in November 2020 that should make a large contribution towards achieving those goals. The parts of affordable housing that are difficult is acquiring property, securing land, and the financing. So having the millage is super helpful. And if you want to go to the next slide, Forrest, the second piece of it is really a creative initiative that the city is undertaking in looking at and directing staff to look at underutilized city-owned sites. And as you know, the city currently owns 350 South Fifth. We're in the, 22nd iteration of trying to develop this site. So I'm really excited that we've made the progress that we've made and that we're partnering with the DDA and the AAATA to do that. This is one of 10 sites that we're looking at developing. Each is different. Some of them have all affordable housing, some have a mixture of affordable housing, but we're probably the farthest along on reaching that goal on this particular site. And I'll turn it back over to Forrest. Forrest, I think your mute is on.
Thanks, Jennifer. I was talking to myself. Anyway, so I'm sure we all heard that affordable housing is one of the key issues in this area. So with the millage, with your big plan, I'm sure you're going to move a lot of this project forward. So before we go through the concept plan on this particular site, I just want to give you some little bit more context here. So as you can see on the screen, on the right side, this is the 350 South Fifth Avenue, the site we're talking about. A lot of people call it the Y lot. And then this is a Blake Trans Center just north of this site. As you can tell, Blake Trans Center has only 4 or 5 bus loading zones off street. The rest of loading happening along 4th Avenue and then some are on 5th Avenue. With this new development, certainly some bus space will be displaced just because the limited curb space there. In the past, probably we talk about a little bit about the existing issues on this side. For example, pedestrian crossing 4th Avenue and then crossing the driveway, the bus lane. And then also when loading, their sidewalks pretty like a standard sidewalk. And for a bus, a lot of passengers in that zone, it's pretty crowded. So their operational capacity limit on the site, since we already fully utilize the 4th Avenue curb and some of the 5th Avenue, so there's no room for future growth. So this project definitely will give us, once we go through some details, you can tell, will give us some more room for bus loading. As we talk about the partnership, and then it's a really collaborative process, planning process, has been a long process so far. A lot of public engagement being done, both by the Housing Commission and by DDA. Like I said before, it's a great partnership. This concept plan is kind of a joint recommendation. Initially, there was some recommendation with, for example, shared bus and service vehicles, but it has evolved based on the public feedback, based on the stakeholder conversations, and based on all parties' involvement. So this is kind of give you a quick overview about the site plan. There will be up to 20 stories, total unit 370, including 145 affordable units. There's also space for commercial, retail, residential amenity. Like we talked about, there are 4 additional bus loading bays. And you can tell there are 2 buildings, kind of an L shape. There's one building parallel to 4th Avenue and one building parallel to William Street. We'll give you a little bit details. Let's say go to the plan here. Like you can see, this is the current the bus loading off street at the Blake Trans Center. So this is the additional bus lane on this new development site. As you can tell, bus can, it's a one-way bus lane. It's a sawtooth design, free flow. And unlike current, on-street bus bays, and bus have to be like a first in, first out. And then you can tell there's a parallel service lane for moving truck, service vehicles, and loading related activities. And then this is the building you see parallel to 4th Avenue. Of course, will be, this bus lane is underneath that building. But on this side is pretty open. So lots, I would say the benefit for this is we got off-street additional capacity for bus loading. Of course, the safer operations. For customers, this also will be a little bit more convenient because they only need to transfer, for those bus bays, they transfer on the single platform. It's safer for pedestrian movement. It's also closer to each other and closer to the Blake Trans Center customer service. So lots of benefits with this new design. And then there are different kind of angles to look at this this new development. As you can tell, this is a kind of a bus lane, and going into this development, and this is probably a clear picture. See the bus lane just south of existing Blake Trade Center. So this is a kind of a separate project, not a part of this concept design, but it's kind of a supplement to the concept, especially related to bus transit center, because it will add additional capacity and improve the overall bus operations along 4th Avenue. So this is a part of the DDA, they call it people-friendly street. And this also gone through the public engagement process, got some feedback, and overall it was pretty positive. Basically, we'll add additional bus loading zones on 4th Avenue, of course, the other side of 4th Avenue, but there will be designated pedestrian crossing, a raised pavement or concrete in this case, to slow down traffic and make this a more transit pedestrian friendly. And you can tell there are wider sidewalks, give more room for pedestrian loading for customer amenities. And then that's in the future, there might be some potential in terms of the intersection, other configuration or transit signal priority design. So those are going to come later. In terms of the timeline, as you can tell, this project also provides utility support for this site development. I think that part would happen before the construction on the site. And then, of course, the whole street improvement components will come later, I believe. But some details need to be determined. And this kind of just give you a quick outline in terms of the cost for the right. There are two components. I mean, I would say three components, two for capital construction related. So one is the bus lane itself. So highlighted in light blue. So to construct this bus only lane or area will cost approximately $1 million. And then there is a component to support to do the building reconfiguration in order to accommodate the bus lane underneath the building. So that part will cost about $1 to $2 million. Ongoing operations or maintenance, this is based on the current maintenance cost at our Blake Trade Center. So roughly about $50,000 to $100,000 a year. Of course, as we mentioned, this is very high level based on the concept plan. All the details need to be confirmed later in this process. And there are also some, components not included in this cost estimate. For example, the canopy or covering the bus staging area somewhere, along here for customer or for bus loading. But roughly, this is the kind of the ballpark estimate for this project. I mean, for the right component. And then in terms of the timeline, as we said, has been approved by this Ann Arbor Planning Commission, going to City Council in March and April. And then once it's got approved, it's going to take 6 months for the RFP process to get a co-developer on board. And of course, sometimes for negotiation and the detailed design and the site plan approval will come later. So at that moment, by towards to late 2023, we'll see a more detailed, refined design, including the bus area and also the confirmed financial investment required for the ride. And then the construction will probably start somewhere 2026. So that's roughly, the concept plan and the cost and timeline. So any questions? Jennifer and Jeff and Michael will all here try to address some of your questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Forrest. We'll open it up to board discussion unless there's any other comment, Matt, from you or any board discussion on these items? Rich, go ahead.
I just had a quick question. So in the, that operation of that $50,000, $100,000, there's a mention of a condo unit. Is that for like living or is that for office space?
We're thinking that the way this will end up developing, and we're still working through those details with both the city attorney and whoever our future co-developer is, that one way to design this from a legal perspective is that the phase 1 building would be a separate condo from phase 2. And that one way to look at it is that basically that lane where the buses are would be its own condo. Or it could be an easement, or it could be a licensing agreement. So there's different ways to approach it.
And if I might add, staff are not recommending or suggesting that we create office space for us in this facility. When we say condo, it's condoizing the bus terminal property, if that makes sense.
Well, thanks, Jennifer and Matt. Just to clarify, that maintenance cost, $50,000 to $100,000 a year, is more for like a regular maintenance, like snow removal, cleaning, those type costs. It's not paying a rent or something like that.
In fact, my recommendation to city council and what I am advocating for throughout this development process is that there's not a quote acquisition cost to the ride, that it would be similar as a public purpose as it would be for affordable housing, where the intent would be probably $1 acquisition, or $1 a year rental, or however it ends up being legally structured, so that the public contribution to the ride's portion of the project is the land that is sitting there itself. And so really on the ride side, the cash contribution is the physical impact of having to redesign the building and the infrastructure of moving the building to accommodate the wide alleyway there, which required us, I'm not gonna be able to go into details, Michael can, on what those technical changes were, but it did cost additional funds from a structural perspective to design the building for a wide enough alley for those buses, as well as just literally, pouring the concrete or asphalt or however that's built once it's actually constructed.
Further questions, discussion? Jesse?
Thank you, Chair. So this plan looks like it's going to lock the Blake into its current footprint. I know in the past we had talked about, hypothetically about potential expansion of the Blake. How does staff feel about the fact that we're kind of locking ourselves in?
Jesse was looking at me when he said that, so.
You're who I talked to about this,
Yeah.
all those many years ago.
So Forrest, I'll take the first shot and feel free to correct me if I get it wrong. Expansion of the Blake is an important part of this project. And we've been very happy with our work with the Housing Commission, the city, and the DDA, because we think we found a workable solution. And one of Forrest's earlier slides showed what could happen to 4th Avenue in terms of additional bus staging there. So between the 4 bus bays that we believe we can get on this site and the additional stuff that we can do, which in many ways activates 4th Avenue, that's pretty good. That's a good workable option. The alternative for this parcel, the Y lot, is that we have nothing on it. So in a situation of having 50% of something or 100% of nothing, we think this is a really good deal and balances a lot of the needs the community has. This downtown is growing. It's becoming more intense. There's a lot of competition for a limited amount of space. So the fact that we're able to find a cooperative way to work all of these functions into one site is really a testament to the great work that Jennifer and Forrest and all of the staff have managed to do.
Thank you. Just one more. Completely switching gears, will our commitments be purely financial to this? Or is there going to be any sort of like staff contribution? If our contributions are more than just contributing funds to support the project, I guess, do we have to start thinking about whether this is going to conform to our executive limitation on capital construction if we're in any way leading or participating in the project?
Let me take that question.
Forrest.
I think Jennifer has offered, we have a member sitting on the evaluation, like RP process, evaluation committee. Of course, with the ongoing detailed design, all this detailed work, we'll be heavily involved. We're not leading the project. We'll be a key member on the project team, kind of a collaborate on the detailed design. And so far, like Matt mentioned and Jennifer mentioned, the relationship has been really good. I mean, we've been collaborating on those planning. So we believe we can achieve the goals for all parties. So with the staffing involvement in the whole process, I think we can come to a best option.
Matt, were you going to add something or no?
I was just going to ask if that answered Jesse's question.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I imagine this will probably come back up as the project progresses. I just was wanting to kind of see what kind of thought had gone into it so far, but I know we're in very early stages of this, so just kind of want to put the thought out there.
Sure. For my two pieces, additional operating staff on our end really are just the maintenance of the existing or the additional areas. So Forrest mentioned snow clearing. That's a great example. Right now, we only clear so much, probably going to double that amount of space. So we'll have additional costs there, but no additional administrative staff, no additional staff in the Blake Transit Center. We don't expect. So I hope that clarifies.
Roger, then Kathleen.
Just so I'm clear on the project, you have a phase 1 and a phase 2. Are both these phases affordable housing, or is one market and one affordable?
I think I got cut off, but I think you asked, are they both affordable housing? Phase 1 is intended to be all affordable, so up to and including 60% of median income or averaging 60% of median income. And phase 2 is intended to be a mixed income, so market rate and also could be including 60% AMI. And even though they're called phase 1 and phase 2, it's highly likely they'll get built at the same time. But they definitely would have to have different legal entities and separate financials just because of the way affordable housing is financed.
Okay, I guess that also answers my second question. You intend to build them both at the same time. It's not one, that's not sequentially, but at all construction at once.
I think, until we select our co-developer, I can't say for certain, but it seems like the most practical way that it'll happen.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So this question is for staff. As I'm thinking about expansion, and I completely understand this expansion is pretty much on the ground level to accommodate buses because we're going to be losing staging areas and things like that. But I'm also wondering for the future as we expand the AATA, will the Blake, does it have the capacity to go up? So in other words, if we expand like we want to with the 45-year plan, and we may need more administrative offices or places to house MCOs when they're in between and whatever. With this new building going up, does it interfere with, or I seem to remember at the beginning when the Blake was built, that it was built with the idea that more could be added. Am I remembering that correctly? And is that even a possibility?
My recollection is somewhat similar, although I wasn't here, that the structure may have the supports to add another floor. We can double check on that. I think the big question will be, would it be economically feasible? As opposed to, if we want office space downtown, why not simply rent proper office space as opposed to building it? That is a decision we can, address in the future. At the moment, no need to go up, but I'm not sure, there's no reason we can't discuss it in the future should the need arise.
Susan, go ahead.
This is a question for Michael, which is, I always love alleys. So, and by the way, I love this project. But the question I have is, where's the business end of the building? We got to put trash someplace. And how does that fit with the lane that we've created for the buses? So where will the trash trucks go in and out, and how will that function as this building houses people and buses?
Yeah, sure. Great question, and love alleys as well. As it relates to the specific design, Forrest, you can see pulled up the screen. What you're seeing here is two separate lanes. So a dedicated bus lane with the angled parking for staging areas for the buses, and then a separate lane for trash and service of the building, of which then building is above that. So 25-foot clear, not yet designed then how those two edges would interact with each other. But I think that would be clearly part of the next phase of design decision.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Other board comments, questions?
I have one.
Go ahead, Mike.
I guess you didn't see me raising my virtual and my physical hand. Matt mentioned that there will be additional space for buses with this expansion, and which will allow an expansion for the future. But I didn't understand how many more buses could now be accommodated versus what they are today. And so I can see some there on 4th Avenue. I think a couple of spaces that I don't recognize. Is that all?
Let me take that, Mike. That's a good question. We do park buses today along 4th Avenue, along the Y lot.
Yep.
Those 4 bus spaces, the added off-street bus space will replace those bus spaces, and plus maybe 1 additional. And there will be 2 more added on the 4th Avenue, like a west side. And then there potentially 1 more, but we didn't. This is not a final design. But to utilize both sides of 4th Avenue, we should be able to add 3-4 additional bus space for future expansion. Just on that same topic, if you remember what we've been talking about as part of the long range plan, with the bus rapid transit coming, very frequent bus services, and there will be a high frequency network. So with bus being more frequent at the site, they don't have to have a dedicated like a bus bay for each bus coming in. So they can share because they just come and go, and we can offset, because then the pulse system today may not be required in the longer term. because all buses come in pretty frequently, and we don't have to time them all together coming in one location. So it can be offset, and in that case, we'll have even more capacity. We can accommodate more buses, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Forrest. But going back to the short term, once this project is completed, including the 4th Avenue changes, how many more buses can be accommodated in total versus the number that can be accommodated today? I still, was it 3 or 4? Was that the answer?
Yes, additional 3 to 4 bus bays.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That would be the net number.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Other board discussion? My own question is, we're going to be voting on a resolution tonight to support the PUD and then for the CEO to investigate a funding resource. Can you talk to the board a little bit about your priorities? Are you looking purely external, Fed versus state, versus the chances that this falls back on our capital budget if we can't come up with an external source?
Certainly. I think there's a very good chance that we would prefer to pay for this particular project with as much local funding as we can. You may be aware we're pursuing federal funding for the Ypsilanti Transit Center, and you may wonder why we wouldn't do the same thing here. This project is far more complex than the Ypsi Transit Center, where we aspire to own the property, be the only people on that property. That's a very easy thing for the federal granting agencies to get their head around. This property has multiple tenants. We don't actually own the land underneath it. There's a building over part of it. To invest federal money in this could bring a host of federal regulations to this project that would be there because of our use of federal money, but would apply to the entire project, which would probably not be a workable option. So in terms of the investigation, we need to look into our capital reserve and what local funds outside of that, perhaps state funding, might be available for this. But I think we will probably come back around to federal funds might not be the best solution in this case because it complicates the project 1,000 times over.
Thank you. Other questions, discussion? Okay, we have a resolution in our packet. It's on page 42 of the packet. It's a resolution. Like I mentioned, the board, it's asking for board support of the conceptual site design, the PUD, plus the ability for the CEO to investigate a funding resource for that, as Matt just described. Can I have somebody move that into the record? Supported by Susan, seconded by Kathleen. Thank you. Can I have a show of hands? All those in favor of the resolution as drafted, raise your hand. All opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer, Jeff, Michael, everybody. Thank you, Forrest, especially. So we'll move on then to CEO report, which is page 42 of the packet, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's 2 pages there. I don't have anything immediately to add, but happy to entertain any questions board members may have about the operational report.
Any questions from Mr. Carpenter on the CEO report or anything in there? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on then to.
You didn't see me.
Sorry, Mike, I keep, I got to bring this monitor closer so I can, yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
I just had one question. Matt's report indicated we are now completely independent of the TheRide. What exactly does that mean? I mean, we're not entirely, because we're still selling tickets and boarding passengers. What specifically did you mean by that?
Certainly. The TheRide program has been around for many years, and it is an interesting public-private partnership with the bus company. Their name is Michigan Flyer. They are a subsidiary of Indian Trails, the same company that provides our D2A2 service, both of which I think are doing quite well. The TheRide service originates in East Lansing, travels down 96, then down 23, stops in Ann Arbor, and continues on to Detroit Metro Airport. It is a private service, except for the section between Ann Arbor and the airport, which is classified as public transit. We helped incubate this service, helped get it off the ground, and helped financially support it in the early years. But always the private company, frankly, provided the lion's share of that support. During the pandemic, it shut down entirely as people were not traveling by air. TheRide kind of lost its market. They reactivated it. They, being Michigan Flyer, reactivated the service several months ago now. Forgive me for not remembering the date. And by that point, they had found state funds to help pay for what had previously in the past perhaps been more local funds from us. So that suited their needs better and kept the service running. And what it meant was we no longer had a contractual relationship with the company. The contract actually expired, I think, in mid-2020. We did not renew it. So we do still have a good, I would call, practical working relationship. I believe we own the brand and the logo. We allow them to stop at the Blake Transit Center. And it's a useful, valuable service to, I think, everyone in Ann Arbor. But their finances are now completely separate from ours. So any regulatory requirements that previously had been on us have been transferred over to the state government. So in the past, fares, any changes to their fares had been something that had to kind of come through us. But that's no longer the case. So they are making those decisions more independently now. And in some ways, this is a success story because we've helped incubate a private service that is now up and running and no longer requires our time, attention, or financial support to keep it going. So they've made some small adjustments to fares. I think they're quite in line with what's going on in the market. And any regulatory concerns are really between them and the Michigan DOT.
I guess, Matt, I'm thinking more in terms of the service itself. For example, could they decide to discontinue it entirely? We'd have no say. Could they decide not to come to the Blake, but instead stop along the freeway someplace in Ann Arbor, and we'd have no say?
Yes, but they could have done that before, too. It was an interesting public-private partnership with some strange nuances.
So our contract with them didn't require them to do anything in particular?
I'm stretching my memory. It went through several iterations. The project grew and evolved naturally over the years, but they always maintained a degree of independence on their business decisions because it is a private service that is already running through town, and we were piggybacking on it. I think that's one way to think about it. It was not we're contracting them to run a bus service for us. They're already blowing through town. We're subsidizing the riders. It was an important nuance to the decision. But they always had a wide degree of independent decision-making. We have a great working relationship with them. They rarely make any operational changes without letting us know well in advance and asking our opinion. So I'm sure that will continue.
Thank you.
Would it be okay if I just ask one very
Susan, go
brief,
ahead.
follow-up question? At the time it was founded, which was, I believe, 2012, 2014, somewhere in there, the airport stipulated it had to be part of ATA because they were charging vehicles $30 to enter the airport, except for public transit, which is why SMART can enter and exit the airport. And it's why I think we were able to get such close drop-off point at the international terminal. Will this change the relationship at the airport if it's no longer associated with ATA, if it's no longer public? Does that mean that the passengers are likely to see an impact because the airport will change its policies toward it?
I don't believe any change has occurred or is being considered. You are remembering correctly, there was quite a bit of angst over access to the airport. I think all of that had been resolved prior to the pandemic. And TheRide's status as public transit, yes, had a lot to do with their association with us initially, but I believe they still legally have that classification and thereby access to the terminals under their new arrangement with MDOT.
Any further questions on the CEO report? Okay. We'll move on then to section 4, policy monitoring. And we have a large report in our packet on the big one for the year, the ends report. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Carpenter to lead us through it. Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you have in your packet, starting on page 45, the annual ends report. A few notes to get us started. First, it is late. It was due in December as our normal timeline, but this was delayed largely due to the cyber attack and the challenges retrieving the data associated with this. I want to thank Rosa Maria Nijuki for all the work she's been putting in to get this ready, and to all our IT staff for unlocking all the information we needed. This report is unique in many ways. It covers 12 full months of the pandemic, roughly the fiscal year of 2021, which ran from October 2020 to September of 2021. The previous year's monitoring report only accounted for 6 months of pandemic impacts. This accounts for a full 12 months, a good chunk of which we had sharply curtailed service, vastly reduced ridership. So that accounts for a lot of the figures that you see here. Hopefully, when we look back on this report in a few years, this will be kind of seen as, the low point of the pandemic before we began to recover and resurge. Finally, we have noted in the past, we haven't always managed to include timelines. When we had a moment or a policy that was not in compliance, we didn't always stipulate when we thought it would be in compliance. We've tried to make sure we added all of those things here. So with that to the report, overall, you'll see with our color-coded stoplight report on page 46, you will see overall, the report receives a red non-compliance mark from us. This is due primarily to 2 key factors. The first is the red mark under policy 134, public transit connected to the Metro Detroit area. That was directly resulted to the D2A2 service not being in operation during this period. I'm happy to note that we did become compliant with this policy 1 month after this monitoring period ended. So that's the easiest timeline to give you, because I can say it's already done. Nevertheless, for this monitoring period, it earns a red non-compliant mark. The rest is really a result of all the yellow on the board. If this were a dashboard, that's too much yellow. That is largely driven by depressed ridership and the effects that has rippling out throughout the organization and the results that you expect the organization to achieve. There were some, I think, notable wins during this period. The restart of the D2A2 service got started during this period and came to fruition right after. The restart of our services, we made decisions over this period about restarting our services, which did occur in August during this period. Unfortunately, only 1 month out of 12 were we putting full service back on the street. ridership did begin to recover. By October, we were seeing about 50% of our ridership back, which is really good by industry standards. But none of that happened during this monitoring period, so will not be covered here. And we also did see some notable wins about influencing outside public policies, particularly the T1 zoning in the city of Ann Arbor was adopted during this period, and Forrest and I gave some helping hands to that along the way. There were some excellent questions expressed by board members in the survey. This was a good discussion in the board responses there. Some excellent questions regarding the evidence presented, whether it was sufficient or not, and a lot of discussions around the interpretations. And there were a couple questions about the accessibility of information on our website. I do want to clarify. There was one question about, could the Zoom meetings be closed captioned? I'm happy to report that starting this evening they are. That was a switch. So thank you to Mike Blackston. We thought that was going to cost a whole lot of money. Apparently they cut us a deal. And then the question about TTY information on the website and how accessible the website is to persons with disabilities. I've double checked. All the standard accessibility features are there. But we probably need to do a better job of laying them out on the front page so that people can see them. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will conclude my comments. I'm happy to respond to any questions, but I also know that we have another guest this evening to provide some feedback to you on the ends.
Yeah, I know Cheryl Weber is hopefully remote and ready to speak to us. So before we open it up for board discussion, as indicated on our meeting agenda, we'll have LAC ownership feedback. So Cheryl, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, and I can see you.
Fantastic. So if you're ready to present, we're ready to listen.
Good. Overarching, the feedback from the LAC was very thoughtful and positive. Some of the LAC members were brief and concise, and others were more detailed. Taking a look at all of the policies in this section. So they like the job you're doing, that things are well written, and that goes to Matt Carpenter also. And they think that your process is helping the transit authority meet the criteria for federal ADA. And some are seeing, still needing some improvement in accessibility, especially on the buses. And we all know that we would like to encourage people that are able to ride the bus, because the paratransit is so costly, and because it just gives us another level of mobility and freedom to go when we want and not necessarily on a tight schedule. And there were a couple of people that spoke to signage and availability of things in languages and audio versions of the same. And one person that just said, well, I like everything that was said. You'll just have to review all the meetings and find all the comments that I already agree with. Clark did two sections. One section was more operational. I forwarded that to Matt to address some service coordination from downtown Ann Arbor to the Amtrak station and back to downtown, because there were some difficulties there that he has brought to the LAC a few times. He does draw some attention to also wanting expanded measurements of some things that are in the ends. And the students that are coming from one of the high schools who might live within what we would consider walking distance, but the walking spaces might not be as safe as everyone would like. But in order to get there by bus, they have to make a very, very long route to get back to where they're going. So he's feeling that limits the ability of our students who aren't eligible for the bus because they're too close to school, but need to use the bus to get to school safely. Let's see. And he goes into some expanse in how we connect to Detroit metropolitan area, including like Dearborn and Plymouth and things like that for consideration. Okay. One person said that the ends are expressing an ideal vision for what we would like to see in transportation. Also, making sure that there is access for people in wheelchairs and firm landing spaces when you're getting out of a vehicle, if you're using a cane or a wheelchair. And I know some of our bus drivers do pull forward to a driveway or other place that is safer than some of the spots that they stop at. And one member's only comment was, "We're expensive." And that is true. And I know that person is very appreciative of the service that is received. Does anyone have any questions for the LAC?
Cheryl, thank you very much. I'll open it up for board questions and discussion now for Matt or for the LAC, for Cheryl. Kathleen, go ahead.
Thank you for Cheryl for her report. I just wanted to share that I attended the last LAC meeting and we had a guest from the WISD. And so it made me rethink policy 1.1.2, the evidence, which says evidence A, anyone using an ADA compliant wheelchair is able to access all buses and passenger terminals. This is reasonable because if a wheelchair can be accommodated, most other physical mobility limitations can be accommodated. And where I'm going with this is, as a wheelchair user, of course, I thought nothing of that. My horizons needed to be expanded a little bit. The concern that was brought up by the person from the WISD, number one, she herself is sight impaired, and she trains students who are sight impaired or who have developmental disabilities. And she came to us with a concern about our new Nova buses. Apparently, the Nova buses do not have the strings going up and down the lane so that you can just pull the string and notify. Apparently, they are push buttons, and they're located, I guess, I haven't ridden one of the Nova buses recently, but I think they're on like the poles and things like that. Her concern is that persons who are blind have been trained all their lives to find the string. People with developmental disabilities, a lot of them need structure and repetitive things, and so they have been taught to use the strings that are no longer there. A sighted person can find those buttons very easily, but non-sighted cannot. And so why I'm saying the ADA for wheelchair compliance, I don't think that's the only answer. I think that there needs to be more on our end. We do need to think about other disabilities. We need to think about, can we offer, okay, that gets into operational stuff. Maybe I should have a conversation with Matt about that. But it really opened my eyes to what the scope of disability is. It's very broad. And when we make a change and get a new bus like that, are we offering services to retrain or even get feedback? I know we got feedback from wheelchair people. I was one of them. But did we bring in people who are developmentally disabled or who have sight issues to also weigh in on these new changes? So I'm not quite sure that has skewed my my thoughts on thinking that this is probably not the best choice of evidence because it only labels wheelchair people. Disability as a spectrum. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, Matt, if you wanted to respond to that or ponder it, I can open it up to other board members, but go ahead if you want to respond.
Thank you. This is, I think, an excellent question about whether the board wants to revisit the policy to be more specific in some way, or it finds the interpretation fails to meet the any reasonable definition standard. In this particular case, we do occasionally integrate new mechanical ideas into buses as they come along. This particular case, Brian actually brought to my attention a month ago and said, we're getting some feedback that passengers, the buttons were an interesting idea. They kind of don't like them. They prefer we go back to the cords. I said, okay, if that's what customers want, I'm not married to the buttons. So we tried something, it didn't work. Go back to what the customers want. We got similar feedback with the automatic wheelchair securing mechanism that I think still have on some buses. A great idea in theory, but turns out wheelchair users really disliked facing backwards. That was just a non-starter for them. So as cool as that technology was, if it doesn't work for our customers and our residents and our market, we're not going to try to force feed it to anybody. So in that particular issue, I think we're moving back to the ropes anyway, for similar reasons to what Kathleen has described. But if the board would like to revisit its policy or judge the interpretation based on this, I think that's certainly within your purview.
So Kathleen, think about it, but if you would like to propose some language or bring it up at a committee meeting for further discussion, please do.
Thank you. If Mike will entertain me on the task force, I'll bring it up there.
I'm sure you will.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yes, thank you. Matt, I think you provided a very comprehensive and report on very complex things. And I really commend you for it. And of course, like you pointed out, a lot of the measurements don't look so good, and that's because of the pandemic. But I just wanted to mention one interpretation that I don't agree with. And I had commented on that in my written comments before. And that has to do with policy 1.3.3, which is entitled Visitors Use Public Transportation in the area. And your interpretation said it's reasonable because, well, one of the interpretations says things like that visitors have reasonable access to fixed route and paratransit services. You say the interpretation is reasonable because we have no way of knowing whether passengers are visitors in the area and therefore cannot directly measure the number of riders who are visitors. To me, that is not a reasonable interpretation because this is supposed to be visitors use the public transportation. But basically, I interpret what you're saying is they have the ability, but we don't know whether they're using it. To me, I would think that there would be like a survey that could be done by TheRide or by some independent organization about actual use. And so that's why I don't agree with your interpretation on that. And I wonder if you have a comment on that.
We are gearing up to do an onboard survey, our first in a while, admittedly. Forrest can correct me. I think it is either this coming spring, and it will ask a question, I think, similar to that. But from a practical purpose, people using the service are largely anonymous. Paratransit aside, where we know who the clientele are. If someone pays cash, it becomes very difficult to know who they are, why they're traveling. So a survey can be done, but the expense of an onboard survey is such that we only traditionally do it every 2 years. So that would be the trade-off, is the expense of collecting that data.
I was also thinking that perhaps Mary Kerr at the destination Ann Arbor, whose responsibility is to bring visitors to the Ann Arbor area, could cooperate or actually perhaps do a survey themselves. I think it would be worthwhile for you and she to talk about that.
Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, and also I'm wondering if this, with our electronic fare system, if they're able to pull, are they able to pull any sort of metrics on who their customers are? Like where, what their billing address is, doors, at least de-identify that information and let us know how many customers of theirs are not in this area.
I think the best we could do is tell you whether someone bought a day pass. We do not collect any personal information about any of the people who buy passes. A large portion of our ridership use their TheRide cards from the university and swipe to get on and off. The university holds tight to all of that personal data. All we ever see is an aggregated number of trips. We have no insight into the personal information there. As a general rule, we shy away from collecting personal information about people on the public transit service. So it's not something that's generally done.
I guess I was thinking more about I can't remember, Easy Pass, whatever our new electronic pay fare, like, they collect some information, can they pass along? I mean, I'm not saying to give us the addresses of their customers, but if they have, some sort of customer information that they can de-identify and like pull together in aggregate so that we're not getting any sort of personal information. Like, the question is just, that seems like information that they have. I can understand if they don't have, if they have policies against collecting it, but have we asked the question of whether they have that information to give us?
No, I don't believe we have, nor would I want to do so. I cannot guarantee the safety of people's personal information. As we've recently learned, no one is entirely safe. So I'd rather not collect that information.
I'm not saying collect the information, I'm saying collect the statistics on like percentage of people who are buying passes who do not live in our service area. I'm not asking for their addresses.
Okay. I can ask the question.
I guess this is all just kind of tying on, but I think maybe a sense that maybe this question hasn't been investigated as thoroughly as it could.
If I might, the interpretation, I think Mike's raised an interesting point in terms of it's, in his opinion, not reasonable because I can't identify exactly who the people are. What I've said is the best we can do is say that it's going to destinations that visitors would use when they're coming in and out of the area. So the service is available should visitors choose to use it. That's reasonable here because we have no way of knowing who the people are. I would stand by that. And the reason being the cost of collecting that information, the cost of securing that information is more than I think we would want to bear for the knowledge of how many people might be using the service. The board certainly can disagree and would do so by saying the interpretation is unreasonable. I can look into the easy, fair thing. I could look into boarding and alighting numbers at the Amtrak station, at the metro airport, which gives us a proxy for how many people are using it. But I'm very hesitant to get into collecting any personal information about any of the individuals using the service. It's not something the industry generally does, and I have great concerns about our ability to secure that information.
Well, I'll just go ahead, Mike.
Let me interrupt. I don't think anybody is advocating getting personal information. I think just talking about is a person a visitor or not. That's not very personal. And furthermore, if it really is not practical because of cost or other reasons, we should probably revise and not use the word use, have the ability to use or something like that. But the actual language is use.
Well, and I think that's an important point, which is visitors use public transportation in the area. I am sure there are some visitors to our area who use our public transportation. There's no quantification here about how many visitors, which is probably what we're really after, what percentage, et cetera, of visitors are using. I mean, by this measurement, he complies if 2 people are using it. If 2 people from, Grand Rapids come in and use our public transportation system for the day, he's complying with that. That's not what we're after, I don't think. So I think Mike is right. We have to look into further revising this and really digging into what we really mean by this. So maybe further discussion is needed. Susan, go ahead.
I just have a quick addition, which is this does not include the football shuttles, which by my estimation are all visitors. And I would think if we just add that as a data point, we have data on that. We know how many people are riding that bus. I doubt very seriously many community members are going to a hotel to ride in. It's predominantly visitors staying at the hotels. So if we could just add that, I think we start to get some data points.
Good point. Any more on that point or others? Roger, go ahead. Then Rich.
Yeah, I just think we may want to look at, as mentioned, the language here, because everything that in the ends and executive limitations should be able to be objectively proved with data. And if there's no way to effectively collect the data without either a lot of cost or getting into people's private information, then we ought to rewrite this to something that we actually can objectively measure. So, whether we just add visitors are able to use public transportation, or whether we go with Susan's. The football shuttles clearly are people that are not, are clearly visitors. So I think there are several ways to go on this.
Rich?
Thanks a lot. So I want to preface my comments that it could be my interpretations are based on ignorance, because I'm not having the full picture or understanding. There was two policies that I thought that were marked as compliant that I was like, I'm not really too sure if they really are. The first one was actually 1.1.1, which is the people with economic challenges have affordable public transportation options. For this one, as we have, I think we've had discussions around this in the past, and based on that, yes, I think your the CEO's interpretation that is compliant fits. But the part that I had a challenge was if we take 1.1.1 and 1.1.2, the people that are affected by that, and combine them, I feel like actually 1.1.1 does not meet the compliance piece. And what I mean by that is that 1.1.1 is around people with economic challenges. 1.1.2 separates people with disabilities and challenges. But combined, I don't think we have anything that kind of fits that, right? So what if you're disabled with an economic challenge? To me, I don't know if we're actually meeting their needs, because if they can't, if someone's disabled or has a different challenge and they're economically challenged, but they can't rely on fixed route services like TheRide and even maybe like TheRide and some of the other services are pretty pricey. So I'm not entirely sure if we're actually meeting the letter of like, are we actually providing services to people that is actually affordable for them. So that was one that I'm saying again, like, I don't think the CEO's interpretation is wrong. I think we as a board maybe have to think about, like, is there something maybe we have to change to meet those two audiences. The other one that I also had, I kind of wanted to challenge a bit, was 1.2.1. That was the public transportation options are increasingly chosen over use of a personal car. I think this one was actually a pretty tough one because of COVID. And so this one for sure, I think their interpretation is going to be tough. But the challenge I had around that was actually the data that it used. Like it actually referred to section 1.3.1, where it even said right there, right, hey, most of the folks, like, or yeah, although ridership has significantly decreased, this is likely due to a steeper decline in driving. So I don't know how logically we could actually say that ridership is increasingly chosen over personal car when I think a large number of the workforce in our service area are working from home during this COVID time. So that was, for me, it was just a interpretation of the usage of the data that was presented to get to that conclusion. So, thank you.
Did you want to respond, Matt, or did you?
I think this is a couple of good things. I'm going to try to keep up with you, Rich. It'll take me to unpack all that. First of all, on page 53 of the packet, policy 1.1.1, it is inherent under point A of my interpretation that the discounted passenger fare applies only to fixed route services. I think that's where you were getting at, that there is no comparable discount for on-demand or paratransit services, and that is correct. That is an inherent part of the interpretation. That is standard industry practice. It is very rare to see discounts in the paratransit market, primarily because it is such a extremely cost-ineffective service to provide. Transit agencies typically kind of use a pull option here by providing a steep discount on the fixed route service to encourage people to move from the paratransit service to the fixed route system, up to and including free rides, which I think is what we have done in the past. I believe, and Fair Deal is of a similar ilk. And perhaps I should have written this. This does not apply to paratransit because of the costs. That's strictly the reason. So if there was someone who was both economically challenged and disabled, they would receive the benefits under both of those policies. But you are correct in noting that one of them is very strictly focused on fixed route transit, and perhaps I should add reasonableness about the costs associated with paratransit. The other one having to do with the mode share data, under policy 131, page 64 of the packet. This is one where I am kind of punting from the evidence perspective and looking to an outside body and saying, these are the experts in producing mode share data, which is like market penetration about public transit. And this is SEMCOG, the Regional Transportation Planning Agency that produces this information. These are their charts. It can be objectively confirmed, by visiting their website and looking at it, that this is what they said it is. How they calculate mode share, I think, is kind of getting into your question about, do I believe these numbers? I'll be honest, that's beyond me. Those numbers are produced with a regional demand forecasting, transportation demand forecasting model, the care and feeding of which runs into millions of dollars a year. There's only one in all of Metro Detroit that I'm aware of. So we defer to them as the experts on that subject. But if you'd like to learn more about that evidence, if it doesn't pass the sniff test to you, you certainly can say, I don't believe it. And that might force me to come back with more information about how that number is developed.
So for that one, 1.2.1, I didn't think I just wanted to mention that. I don't think that's something worthwhile to spend a lot of time on, especially hopefully as we exit out of COVID, things will get better and we will see that increased usage. For 1.1.1, I'm wondering if that's maybe something that we could maybe factor into the long range plan. It's like, how do we better serve that audience, right? That falls into the economic challenge and really can't rely on fixed ride or fixed route as a consistent mode of transportation to meet their needs. Because for me, I just looking at even just us as a state as a whole, right? We have issues with we have more people dying and leaving the state than being born and staying in the state. For me, that indicates that we're going to have like a much older generation of people, I think, taking up a greater percentage of our population. And I get concerned that especially the older adult generation, are we going to really be able to appropriately serve their needs? And I know, like with the fixed route, yes, we can definitely do that. But I mean, I personally don't know the percentage of our population that's in particular older adults, disabled, or have various other handicaps and can't rely on fixed routes. And I don't know if that percentage is large enough to consider, or it's increasing, it's decreasing. I mean, maybe the question is there data out there that we can maybe look at that's available around that population?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a big can of worms.
Yeah.
That you've opened there. Yes, I think the long-range plan is the best place to address that, particularly about, this is about the past, the long-range plan is about the future. The long-range plan envisions a fairly standard paratransit operation with discounts similar to what you see in here. So if that is a concern for the board, yes, definitely raise that during the long-range plan. Yes, there is an aging cohort. It will inevitably give rise to a group, to a population that has a larger incidence of disabilities and more people wanting to use services like TheRide, which unfortunately means higher expenses for us. And if we reduce the fares on that, then that's just a greater net subsidy for us, which if the board wants the agency to go in that direction, definitely the long-range plan is the place to signal that to us.
I mean, personally, I'm not sure. I guess I would maybe defer to see if the board thinks it's something worthwhile to explore for the LRP. Am I allowed to ask that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody want to weigh in on that particular point in terms of that kind of data?
I might offer that Forrest will be coming next month to give a expansive presentation on the next phase of the long-range plan, and we could address that issue specifically.
Well, it's more of, I don't want to have Forrest spending time kind of looking at something if the rest of the board is not that, like, I guess, interested, or they don't see it really as a big issue. Like I said, a lot of this is around ignorance on my part, so I don't want staff being sent down a rabbit hole that's unnecessary.
I guess it depends on how, you said it's a big can of worms, just how easy is it to open that can of worms? I mean, if Forrest can get that by next month, can he present that to us? Because I think it is, I mean, the demographic shift is probably an important data point for us. But please look into it, and if you can get back to us within the committees, that'd be good. Let's, again, make sure that when we're not talking, we're muting ourselves here. All right, other board members on the ends report? Roger, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on what Rich said about the mode share, and obviously you're just going to use SEMCOG data because there's no other reasonable way of doing it. Since the pandemic is certainly skewing the data significantly, would it be possible just to see what, say, the 2019 numbers were, so we just have some idea of what normal was before we went into the pandemic?
Absolutely, those figures are in the last year's ends report. We were using the same evidence at that time. And I think we have for at least 2 or 3 years.
Fine, I'll dig it out and look at myself, thank you.
Other discussion, questions? Jesse?
I have a procedural question. If I wanted to put an amendment on, I assume I can't make an amendment unless there's a motion on the floor, and right now there's not a motion on the floor.
Well, there's no, I mean, yeah, no, there's no motion on the floor, and really we're just going to be moving to adopt it at a certain level again, in compliance, except for items noted, et cetera.
I'd like to express, I'd like to have an opportunity to put an amendment once the motion is on the, put forward before we go put it to a vote.
What do you mean by amendment?
Just given our discussion regarding 133, it seemed like there was a certain number of board members who felt that maybe that it would be better off with E, cannot be determined, since we felt like the evidence presented wasn't sufficient to talk about that point, that being the use, whether visitors were using the system. And we didn't feel like that evidence actually indicated whether or not visitors were actually using the system. So just kind of felt, so that would be my amendment.
Well, I mean, you're certainly free to propose that as the level of adoption. And you can do that if, once we are concluding with open discussion. Other discussion, debate, questions, clarifications? Okay. So we have to move to adopt now at the levels that I mentioned. There is A, we are in compliance; B, in compliance except for items noted; C, making reasonable progress toward compliance; D, not in compliance and not making reasonable progress; or E, cannot be determined. And can I hear a suggestion or a motion from the floor? Jesse?
I have a motion, and I'll try and keep it effective. I would like to.
You can just say E if you want. I mean,
well, and I don't think this has an effect on the entire report, but this gets to a larger issue that I still have with the way that we vote on these, but I'm not going to open that discussion. I'm just going to go forward with it and say that I would like to put this as in compliance except as items noted, with one change, that 133 is cannot be determined. And I don't think that has any knock-on effects for the global for the larger policies of 1.3, since it's already incompliant or partially compliant.
that's fine.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that. If we have a kind of a split, that's not a problem for me. Can I have a second for in compliance except for items noted and it cannot be determined on 133? That's a second from Rich. Any other further discussion? Right. All in favor of the passing at level B except for 1.3, which is E, raise your hand. Opposed? It passes unanimously at that level. So thank you, and thank you, Matt, for your work on this. All right, we'll move on then to 4.2, the Board Management Delegation Policies Survey, which is in your packet. Survey results were generally very favorable. All in all, we rated ourselves pretty good. Any discussion or debate about the way we are handling our board versus management delegation, or points that want to be noted or discussed openly? Jesse?
I was curious about some people felt like we were like 100% good on this, and some people felt like we weren't as good on this, and it felt like maybe that was coming down to like the amount to which we interact with the deputy CEOs as opposed to like the CEO, and I guess that kind of made me wonder, how much are people talking directly to the CEOs without involving Matt, or are people also just thinking, well, I talked to Matt and then I started working with the deputy CEO after that? And is that what we're feeling is, I wanted to kind of dig into that, because my interpretation has been like, I always talk to Matt and the deputy CEOs, and then I might have a continuing conversation with one of the deputy CEOs after that. And I feel like that's perfectly fine and above board. But maybe my interpretation is different than others.
It's a good thing worth debating. I think Matt gives access to the deputy CEOs as board members want to talk to them. My interpretation of it is that that's only at Matt's discretion when he does that. So we don't bypass Matt. At least I hope we don't. But if others feel that we bypass too much, or Matt defers too much and everything, he should be the focal point for everything. In discussion, debate on that? Go ahead, Kathleen.
I hear what Jesse's saying, but I also feel like there have been times in committee meetings and whatnot where the CFO or this, one of the deputy CEOs will say directly, if you have any comments or concerns, come to me. And that I do. I don't go directly to Matt, because that person, be it Forrest or Brian or whatever, has invited me to give them feedback directly in a meeting. So if that interpretation is wrong, maybe I should be going to Matt first saying, by the way, I'm going to, Matt, are you comfortable with that interpretation?
And just let me clarify, I think it's one thing in a committee meeting, when Matt is present, to say, hey, Brian or Dina, and have them address a question. It's another thing if Matt is not aware of the communications, but you're going straight to them, either calling them or emailing them without Matt's knowledge in any way, shape, or form. I think there's a distinction if Matt's present in the room. So.
I appreciate that. I guess I just wanted further clarification, just to make sure that my waters weren't muddy.
Sure. Matt?
Thank you. My impression of the intent of this policy is sort of a chain of command question, that I am, as the CEO, the only staff person accountable to you for your policies. Everybody else reports to me, and they're accountable to me in various chains of command. That does not mean that all communication has to include me. But there are cases where, in other boards, somewhat renegade board members might attempt to circumvent the board or the CEO by going around the board or the CEO and speaking to junior staff and putting them in uncomfortable positions. I do not feel that that risk exists here in this organization. I've given my deputies carte blanche to interact with you in any way that they see fit. And if any of you ask, because I don't think this is a really a strong risk, I've also been very clear with them that if any board member ever asks them to do something that's uncomfortable or they feel like their spider sense is going off, come to me right away. They never have. I think part of the issue here is on this policy, the board's sole official connection to the operational organization is through me. So I deliver the reports. I'm the one who's officially accountable. If you want to request information formally, that's the chain of command, the chain of communication that works. But these unofficial sort of incidental questions, communiques, just trying to help ourselves learn about this industry, that is all very reasonable for having that conversation. I feel like we have a effective working relationship between the board members and the deputy CEOs. I don't have any concerns there with you guys calling them up. I would have a concern if one of you said, I was talking to so-and-so the other day and they said something that completely contradicts what you said. So I'm just, I'm going with what they said. That to me is getting into some gray areas. If was that the official, I don't know, but I don't believe we have those concerns here. So I don't know if that clarifies anything or makes it worse, but that's my response.
I refer back to Jesse to see if he was satisfied.
Yeah, I think so. I had been surprised that so many people said most of the time, or that fully half, almost, or a little over half the board said that we're only doing this most of the time. And I thought, well, I think that we're pretty good about it. Because to me, that was a issue of like, are we compliant most of the time versus always? So it sounds to me like from the definitions that we're talking about, we actually are, we're doing this all the time, that there is nothing. And so I just kind of want maybe some board members who maybe felt that we didn't, unless there is a board member or there are board members who don't feel that we always adhere to that. I think that's what I want to do. I wanted to call out was this an issue of definitions or is this actually an issue of compliance?
Yeah, no, I think, there's room for gray area because somebody like our treasurer and head of the finance committee, Mike, might call Dina and say, hey, I need to, clarify something on this part of the budget, right? And so that's, Matt may or may not be on the call. However, Mike's not going to put Dina on the spot to say, make a commitment to do X or Y, right? And she's not going to do that without talking to Matt, and Mike wouldn't ask Dina to do that without talking to Matt. So I think that's what Matt's getting at in terms of that doesn't have, there's no concern about that. So I agree with you. I think it is, I think I voted for 100% of the time because I don't think it's getting to that. But there certainly is communication going on between deputies and board members that may or may not involve Matt at any point in time. But yes, nothing would get done and nothing would move the needle without Matt's knowing about it. I think that's the issue. And do we feel comfortable 100% of the time of that? So yeah, I think there's gray in the interpretation. Others? Kathleen?
So I can't say that I'm one of the ones who said not all the time, because I don't have a copy of what my survey answers were. But I do know that when I was answering the survey, I tried to answer it from the perspective of what I see at our board meetings and our service committee meetings, because I don't know what all of you are doing when we're not together. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes some of those questions, they're like, does the board do this all the time? Well, I don't know because I'm not with Susan and I'm not with Rich and I don't know if they're doing all these things. And so sometimes I won't lean towards the 100% perfect because I recognize that there may be times where it's not. And so that has always been a challenge for me filling out the survey. But if I were to go based on just what I see at board meetings and committee meetings and task force, I would certainly lean towards more like the 100%. So does that help you, Jesse?
Yeah, certainly. What I just wanted to call out is if anyone felt like we weren't actually in compliance with this policy, and again, just wanted to ask that question.
And for the record, Kathleen doesn't trust her fellow board members, particularly Rich and Susan. She doesn't know what we're doing. And I don't trust you. All right. Anybody else? Raymond?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick little announcement here. We had a pretty productive meeting of our subcommittee talking about kind of ends and monitoring. And I bring that up because especially in this space, this is reflective as us as a board and how we conduct kind of our business, especially in relationship to staff. And even tonight, there was kind of this discussion about interpretation. And I think what we're going to try to hopefully get out of that subcommittee meeting are some processes and clarifications that we as a board can follow to give better direction to Matt and his staff. So, I think even this discussion we're having right now and some of the responses you see in the survey kind of show that we don't know who's on first, right? Is it up to Matt to give us direction, or is it up for us to give Matt direction, and in which instances which, in terms of interpretation versus ends versus means? So I think hopefully there's going to be some good work that comes out of that I think will clarify a lot of these processes and how we can maybe more effectively give direction to Matt. And if he is going in a direction that we don't think is consistent with our collective thinking, then we have a mechanism to kind of steer him back in the direction of what we think. So more to come in this space. I just felt like this was an appropriate time to bring that up because it will, I think, inform these discussions in the future.
And I think to follow up on that, what's going to be important from this discussion is we don't lose the momentum of the discussion itself. So, I mean, I think we've talked about this in the past where we note deficiencies and then they kind of go into the ether and nobody follows up on them. So, I think this is probably, I guess I'm putting the other governance committee members on task. I think this is what we need to do at the governance committee to look at this discussion here and make sure that we follow through with the procedures and the policies and the clarifications. So I'll put this on the governance committee's plate to take that on. So we come back in the future with progress and updates. So thank you for noting that. Yep, I see. I did see him this time. I would go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to briefly mention 4.2.2. And it's short, let me read it. The board will not evaluate either formally or informally any staff member other than the CEO. That's one sentence. There's a second sentence. Board members are not restricted from expressing any level of satisfaction in a confidential conversation with the CEO. To me, there's a big mixed message there. And the second seems to contradict the first sentence, particularly if you interpret the second sentence to be including any staff other than the CEO. I think that needs to be rewritten, something there. Am I the only one who thinks that's contradictory?
No, I think there's certainly room for misinterpretation and contradiction. I think when we drafted this, the point of the second sentence was not that we could say it wouldn't hold us back from saying, Matt, you're at fault for every single thing that's wrong with the agency. We could approach Matt and say, I'm not happy with our recruiting. I'm not happy with our, whatever. And even though Matt may, as a CEO, he's ultimately responsible for it. If we wanted to say to him privately, formally, or, informally in a private conversation, there's some part of the business, some part of the organization that we're not satisfied with, Matt will listen to that. So it wasn't meant to be an evaluation, but simply expressing an opinion to Matt about some facet of the organization is not restricted by board members. So people wouldn't feel like I'm not happy with something, but I can't say anything to Matt because I can't formally or informally evaluate anybody but the CEO. So if you have a opinion about an operations issue or a planning issue that you want to express, you're not held back from doing that. So, but I fully see what you're saying, Mike, that we can't, maybe board members feel that there's a discrepancy between these two items, but that was what it was meant to do. And if that's not clear, then we can think about revising that in some way. I don't have the wordsmithing in my head right now to fix that, but if we can always work on that.
Yeah, I think we should revise the second sentence.
Okay, we can take that on. Anybody else? Okay. Is that a monitoring report we need to adopt, I guess? That's just a survey, yeah. All right, then we'll move on to 4.3, monitoring streamlining. And Mike, if you want to weigh in.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Raymond for giving my report. I'm not sure that I need to say anything more. No, I agree with what Raymond said. We did have a very good meeting, I think, on the February 11th. We met with Rose, and the members of the task force were, in addition to Raymond, Kathleen and Rich. Matt was also there, as well as Rosa Maria. We talked about the scope of the task force, the priorities that we should have, and we concluded the top priority, which was pretty much along the lines of what Raymond mentioned, were really to develop new and better procedures and some forms to fill out regarding the monitoring reports. And I think we all can remember past board meetings where we really got off on the tangents, trying to interpret things and amend things. We have only 5 categories to rate. I think that Jesse did a great job at the beginning of the rating to propose a slight amendment to it, which everybody liked. And I think we can try to head those off in terms of some better procedures. But I think Jesse handled it very well tonight. Also, we talked about developing procedures for tracking compliance to the reports. In fact, Raymond even had a brief kind of an outline of how he thought that might work, and we all liked it. This particular report that on the ends that Matt gave us today, he did have something in there about the timeline for addressing non-compliance, and that's certainly a step forward. But I think we can probably develop something that maybe is a little bit better and more standardized in terms of seeing what we saw as deficiencies in the past and how that has or has not changed over time. Again, I think Raymond had a very good idea about that. We have our next meeting of the task force on March 10th. At that time, Rose will come back to us. She had some good things that she'd already told us that she had in mind about revising how we do the monitoring reports. So she's going to have a formal proposal for us we can discuss on March 10th. And I hope that either that we can decide in March, or maybe more likely the next meeting in April, to have a specific recommendation to bring to the board to discuss, and I hope even vote on. So anyway, I think we're making good progress. But let me also mention, Rich concluded that he really doesn't have time to be attending these task force meetings. And so we are down 1. We had, it was 4 people in total, including me. So I would be very happy to accept any volunteers to replace Rich on the task force. And Jesse certainly made a good start on that tonight if he wants to volunteer. But anyway, please let me know if you would like to participate. As I said, I think we had a very good meeting. I think we're going to have some good results. Our next time we're going to meet is March 10th.
Thank you, Mike.
And does Raymond or anybody else on the task force have anything to add?
Anything to add? Any questions from board members? Rich?
I just want to say that choosing to come off the task force was not easy for me, but I just have my hand in way too much stuff and I really needed to kind of recoup some time for myself. So I completely support, and I was like, yeah, they got a great group, and they didn't need me on there, so thanks.
Jesse, go ahead.
I really do appreciate the vote of confidence. Unfortunately, I can't, as much as I would like to, and I think this is really good work that you're doing. And I really appreciated both you and Raymond speaking to the issues of like procedure, because I think that's where obviously my biggest hang up. And I know I bear some responsibility for having prolonged some discussions, but a lot of it I feel like has come down to procedure and not really having a clear understanding of like how we can, after having discussed these reports, how we can express how we feel, any changes that we want to make. And I'm looking forward to your results on that. If you want me to, if it would help for me to submit a statement of my own issues with it, I'm happy to do that. I would really like to join the task force, but unfortunately I don't have time. But, maybe let us, the other board members, know how we can contribute if we, outside of joining the task force.
Okay, thanks, Jesse.
Any other comments? I will close section 4 then and move on to emergent items. Any emergent business not on the agenda already? If not, we'll move to closing items. We have on our, we had a governance committee meeting earlier today, and trust me when I tell you, we have a very full meeting for next month. So we're going to have this has been a full meeting. Next month is going to be a full meeting. But audit, millage, 2.5, the LRP, all that's going to be on the agenda for next month and some other things. Any questions, comments about topics? If not, we'll move to 6.2, public comment. We'll open it back up to the public for anybody who wants to address the board for 3 minutes. If you are on the phone, again, if you want to raise your hand with the raise hand icon, please do so. If you're on the phone, you can press *9. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Muller, for the time and opportunity to speak again. Forrest, I'm going to put you on the spot for one quick second. Great presentation. Ann Arbor Housing Commission has done a wonderful job with the presentation. The condos are really, something that has been needed in the Ann Arbor area, especially in the downtown area. I know there's a lot of people that wish they could live downtown, and now this is the opportunity to find a place as soon as the building opens for business. This will bring more economic development to the city, and it'll make our public transit agency thrive more than what it is now. Ann Arbor is the next Dearborn. Ann Arbor is the next small Detroit. There's so many small businesses growing, local businesses, nationwide businesses. Ann Arbor is thriving. And just to see this city grow from being down to here, up to here, is just amazing. And all the work that, the Ann Arbor Area Transit does to make this city thrive, to get people to and from jobs, is just amazing. And I know this board works effortlessly to get things done. I know you, Chairman Mahler, that do a lot for this board. So I want to give you some thanks there. But just keep on doing what you're doing and keep on, keeping this city rolling, especially with the condos. The condos, are definitely needed, and, it'll bring more jobs and also more residency to the area and more economic development. So thank you so much, and great presentation, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody remotely, Deb, who wants to address the board? Go ahead.
Ms. Michelle Barney, you are unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to say, with your new electronic, the system you put in after you got hacked, I think you're doing a wonderful job. We've had one problem in the last month. I call and make a reservation. I repeat it. The person who took it repeats it. We agree, and fine. But 3 or 4 times we've had the case where it's been recorded wrong. And sometimes the bus comes 20 minutes early or the van comes to my home 20 minutes early. And of course, I'm not ready. And we couldn't figure out what happened. And finally, they said, oh, our records say to pick you up at 12:36. And I'm saying, no, my records say 12:56, for example. And we don't know. And that's happened several times. We don't know where that's happening. So that should be looked at. But the other thing, I read the public transit article a week ago, Sunday, in the Ann Arbor News, and I came up with an idea. Have you considered running an ad campaign? Now, some of the people who don't ride haven't got their jobs back, or they're working from home still, or whatever. But there are people who don't ride because they're afraid of riding the buses because of COVID. And yet you have one of the safest systems I've seen. I wonder whether working with some of your passengers, whether public relations could run an ad campaign. For instance, it could show happy riders with a caption that could be put into a newspaper like this, like the Ann Arbor News, where people could see it. Things that would make people smile, that would put out the safety features, the pleasantness of riding the bus, etc. Anyway, some kind of real ad campaign to get riders back, to wake them up that things are better now. I don't know. The other thing is the millage is in 2023. Is that right? Hello?
Our current millage expires in 2023. Yes.
Okay. I am hoping that you will help get us millage workers together so that we can meet long before the millage comes due and plan on how to organize how we will campaign for the millage, because you can't. Because I am happy to again ride the buses and get people to vote if they're not registered, and get people out and let them know that it will be on the ballot and so forth. But we need a lot of people. And if you have lists of people who have done this before and who will do it again, I hope you will help us get in touch with each other. The people I knew, many of whom have either risen to public elective office and don't have the time to do this, or have moved outstate. And I hope I will meet with other millage workers so that we can plan a campaign to get this millage through. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Deb, we have anybody else?
Nope, there's no one else. Thanks.
All right, we'll close the public session. At this time in the agenda, we have a proposed closed session under Section 8C of the Open Meetings Act. I need a roll call vote to go into closed session. And I'll have to get a yes or no by roll call vote. So roll call vote to go into closed session at this time will start, so I don't forget it. Mike, yes or no?
Yes, and let me add that I have been participating virtually, and I'm in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Ryan? Yes. Roger?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. So the board meeting is open. For the open meeting is closed, and we'll go into closed session at this time, and we'll be back after the closed session is done. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Policy governance has really improved for the person who moderates it needs to know that just because I'm here to do a report, it doesn't mean that I don't participate during public comment. I'm a consumer as well as the LAC. Perspective would be the word, but yeah. You did your walk up already on the food, right? Yeah. Very close to. Boy, Mr. Cooper. Good boy. Good boy, Mr. Riley. Good boy.
Can I put the food things away?
Yeah,
You have enough Fritos and such?
yeah.
Okay.
Wow, there's still an executive session.
All right, we are back in open session to conclude the regular board meeting agenda. This was our first meeting in person in quite a while, and I think it went very well technology-wise in our new digs here. So thank you to the staff and the tech people who made this happen. This worked out very well, and only will get better from here, so thank you very much. Can I have a motion to conclude the meeting? Roger. Seconded by Jesse. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.